Stories and economic trends reshaping the world. Talking Business Asia on BBC World News.
An economic crisis that is disrupting lives of ordinary Sri Lankans. The country is facing its most severe political crisis too, that is threatening to unseat a political dynasty that has governed this country for decades. The country is almost bankrupt, with no cash to pay for imports of even basic everyday essentials. How did things get so bad, and what's next? We delve deeper into the issues in this episode of Talking Business Asia. Hello and welcome to Talking Business Asia. I'm Archana Shukla. I'm here in Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, where this island nation of 22 million is in the midst of an economic and political emergency. Thousands are taking to the streets daily to protest. They are frustrated with shortages of essentials and a dramatic increase in the cost of living. A call for change. These protesters are chanting, they will not leave until the government does. For days, Sri Lanka's youth have been camped outside the president's office, demanding the powerful Rajapaksa family, which has governed the country for decades, resign. Kushan Chandana, a music composer, has been coming daily with his mother, braving even the harshest sun and rain.
I'm 25 years old. I can't just sleep all the time. Come on. This has to change. So that's why I'm here. I'm supporting these guys because there are so many other people just like me. Right, entrepreneurs, workers, they can't do anything. So that's why they're here.
Prices of daily necessities have shot up dramatically. The country's reserves of foreign currency used to pay for these imports has dried up. Citizens have spent their days in queues, buying petrol, cooking gas and food, many times returning empty-handed.
Most of my time is spent on finding fuel. I can't take passengers, and so earnings have fallen.
Without enough fuel to generate electricity, power cuts lasting hours are the norm. From a loaf of bread to rice to vegetables, a plate of basic food items in a typical lunch costs 3 times more.
The cost of living has made things difficult. In the past, we had 3 meals, but now we've reduced to 1 to 2 meals.
Many blame tax cuts in 2019 that shrunk government revenues at a time when interest rates were low, both factors in fueling inflation of 17%. The government's decision to ban the use of chemical fertilizers in farming reduced what crops produced. Exports of tea, an important earner of foreign currency, fell. But the biggest reason? The nation's ballooning $51 billion of foreign debt, a fifth of which are owed to Chinese banks.
We borrowed more money to pay interest at a higher interest rate. So as a result, the debt snowballed and accumulated, and now we are having a problem in multiple fronts. One is on the balance of payment crisis, where we really can't import the essentials such as petroleum products, even medicine.
When the pandemic curtailed global tourism and forced textile factories to shut, Sri Lanka lost 2 of its most important sources of foreign currency. Both industries make up nearly 20% of GDP. The country has just under $2 billion in foreign reserves, and it needs 3 times that amount just to make interest payments on its massive debt and import essentials. Sri Lanka is negotiating with the IMF as well as some of its biggest creditors, China and India, for emergency loans and to delay payment or cancel part of their debt. The man leading these crucial negotiations is Sri Lanka's current finance minister, Ali Sabri. He is a former justice minister, but perhaps more importantly, is a trusted confidant of the embattled president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Mr. Sabri is also tasked with persuading countries such as China for credit lines to ease the financial burden. I met him in his office right after he returned from meetings for a bailout package with the International Monetary Fund and other creditors. Mr. Sabri, how much financial assistance in terms of quantum of money do you require in the short term, in 1 year, for you to deal with your issues right now?
Till about December, we need external funding of 3 to 4 billion infusion for us to get back our supply lines restored and service the creditors who are not subjected to the restructuring and to kickstart the economy. So somewhere in the region of about 4 billion external funds are required for us.
You were discussing an emergency loan facility with China as well. Where are the conversations right now?
No decision yet. We have made that discussions, and discussions are ongoing. We are confident that will come through. But right now, immediately there is no breakthrough. I don't see anything right now. The ambassador for China in Sri Lanka had mentioned that it's not the most desired thing for the Sri Lanka to go for IMF. But on our part, we did not have a choice. We will explain to them and we will continue to discuss with them. And they are a good friend of Sri Lanka for a long period of time.
A normal IMF bailout package would mean, and they've very specifically specified as well, that you have to raise taxes, you have to float your interest rates, you have to cut down on government spending. How much more can the country bear?
We have to increase the taxes. We need to find a way to bridge the revenue gap and the expenditure which we have. We have already sent a circular out not to get involved in any new projects or capital expenditure. So we are looking at all those possible areas. And any country to sustain, if you are not having like large oil reserves or something, tax revenue need to be 13, 14, 15% bare minimum. So we have 8.6%, which is definitely not sustainable. We must have a safety net to look after the poor. So we are working with the World Bank in terms of cash transfers and supporting them so that they will be protected.
The decision to suspend your repayments, debt repayments, was a tough one because that puts you, all your credit ratings fall and it becomes difficult for you to raise funds in the market. Do you have any target on when your debt repayments could start? It
was a kind of a fact that we did not have the money and we had to declare a moratorium. But I'm sure and I'm confident that our creditors, we will discuss with them, find a way to restructure it, and then probably we will gain market taxes as soon as possible. Again, very, very difficult for me to give a timeline. I hope and pray that it is as soon as possible, probably 6 months, 1 year down the line, but I don't know. The people are already burdened with the economic crisis, with rise in prices, with shortages, and will they have the bandwidth to take on further increase in taxes? The people, yes, they are suffering and it is a very unfortunate situation. But what are the choices we are left with? Do you want the whole system to collapse and then there is absolutely nothing? Bank cannot open LCs, no importations, and then no goods at the ground. So you need to have a balance and go through the pain so that you regain. So many countries have gone through this. Mr. Sabri, as finance minister, what will you do different so that your country is not in this sort of a situation anytime later in future? Yeah. First of all, you are very correct that we should not take any more debts in future which is not sustainable. When we take a debt, we must have a plan to pay back. Thirdly, we must have realistic revenue mechanism so that we are not necessary to go and lend somewhere else because your tax and the other revenues support your day-to-day expenditure. And we will promote investment in terms of instead of debt itself, in terms of our port city, renewable energy, IT industry, garment industry, tourism. So it's basically on the long run, our aim is to go for investment, ask for support for sustainable energy and energy dependent kind of project, reduce our expenditure and get back to the growth trajectory in the areas which we have identified. We are in the process of developing a 10-year map from crisis to growth. The opposition parties have said they have
support of enough parliamentarians to pass a no confidence motion. If that happens in the next few days or weeks, would that not be a concern to your creditors who are also looking forward to some political stability in the country as they discuss restructuring?
Yeah, it will definitely have an impact. Basically, this is an economic crisis. Economic crises have led to this political crisis. It's not a political crisis which led to the economic crisis. So, in order to get over, you need to have a plan for economic recovery. Nobody is providing that framework. Not the protester, not the opposition, no one is providing. So right now, important thing is to have an economic recovery plan and get that going immediately.
That was Sri Lanka's Finance Minister Ali Sabri. Time now for a short break. When we come back, how is Sri Lanka's tea industry faring this crisis? We speak to the CEO of Dilmah Tea.
Wallonia, a way of life where creation thrives. Continuously striving for balance in a circular green economy. A land of excellence and achievement, shaping our future. Where expertise drives our world each time further. Wallonia, the land of sustainable innovation.
Space shuttle launches were an amazing experience. It's combustible. It's really, shaking kind of ride.
I was the first black man they had ever seen.
You're a really wonderful dancer, but you're never going to be a ballerina because of the color of your skin.
We achieved what we thought would be impossible, i.e. settlement rights for all Gurkhas.
She says, Norman, you won the Nobel Prize.
Witness history on BBC World News.
Welcome back. The tea industry is one of the main sources of foreign exchange for Sri Lanka. But a sharp drop in exports because of the pandemic and an ill-fated push to organic farming has given a jolt to the industry. We travelled to tea estates in Hatton district in central Sri Lanka. Nestled in the scenic hills, these quaint tea estates are central to Sri Lanka's economy. They employ more than 500,000 people. But the economic crisis has forced changes. I spoke with Dilhan Fernando, the CEO of Dilmah Tea, about the extent of the impact.
Initially, where it concerned the safety of our people was the fact that we had to build parallel transport networks. That was going back to the pandemic. Extending that into what evolved into the economic crisis was the fact that the power cuts, yes, and there again, it's an increase in costs because you're running generators, you're building capacity for fuel storage, you're doing things that you have never done before. And you're seeing a lot of businesses adapting.
Does this uncertainty, both on the economic side as well as on the political side, does that worry you as an industrialist?
Absolutely. It is what we wake up every morning. I mean, I think I speak for many others who are also in the export and other industries. People involved in imports, and we have one part of our business that has been importing and supplying stationery and different items. I mean, that side of the business is completely closed. There is another side where here, Resplendent Ceylon with tea tourism, that side has found its ability to engage with its customers, reassure them and make sure that they're safe and be able to build the environment that is required for their safety and to continue. Where the tea export side is concerned, it's similar. So I think it has had different impact on different sectors.
How has this economic crisis affected your plantation workers? Are they participating in protests to talk about the impact of the crisis on their lives?
Absolutely. This is a people's protest. It's not a political one. It's the people crying out for better government, for more competent management of the economy. And it's the people fundamentally recognizing that now is a time for us to forget what has distanced us and look to what unites us.
Do you also go to these protests?
Absolutely. Like everyone in my family, our colleagues and so on. What is important about this is the environment in the protests. It's not one of agitation, not of violence. It is one of constructive criticism and seeking what is a common and a good objective. They're asking ultimately for better government. They're asking ultimately for greater unity, and they're asking for less politics. There is nothing in that to oppose or not to support.
Let me talk to you about the impact of this rapid switch from chemical fertilizers to organic fertilizers. What was the impact of that on your business, and do you see that as a reason for the partial food shortages?
Absolutely, there can be no question. It was a very unwise move because soils, particularly soils such as these, with 150 years of use in plantations, cannot immediately be adjusted to provide the nutrients required for organic cultivation. And so it didn't impact only the plantation sector. It wasn't just tea, rubber, it was also spices, it's food production generally. The market simply doesn't exist for a nation to convert overnight, certainly not in tea. It would have been a catastrophe. The assumption there was that yes, there was knowledge that we would lose 20% of our yield, but there was expectation that there would be a 20-30% increase in value. That was theoretical and completely ill-informed. So it came at the worst possible time, and it has had a debilitating effect. But fortunately, with the reversal, we're seeing around us the beginnings of recovery.
Which are the regions that are doing well when it comes to exports, and has there been a slump in demand from your larger export countries, China and Russia?
There has, and it's connected as much with the increase in logistics cost. You're not talking about 10-20%, you're talking about 100-200% in cost of freight. So in that environment, you have also countries that are battling inflation, particularly food inflation. So Russia has attempted this to cap food inflation for obvious reasons, political and otherwise. And so, of course, there is a slump in demand because they're looking to alternate sources. The same applies where China is concerned, but China, you have the additional factor that the lockdown, the zero COVID policy has imposed severe restrictions on supply.
Are you diversifying to other markets, other products?
At this point, it's diversification that will keep the market going. Because Ceylon Tea, the reality is, for all the reasons you see around you, the conservative agricultural practices, the traditional, the hand picking, etc. And this is terrain that defies mechanization. So we are always going to have a relatively high cost of production. So in that environment, the future lies in diversifying. For our part, we are looking at authentic iced teas. We're looking at different products that are based on tea, but also connecting tea and spices and so on. And the opportunity is huge because tea works beautifully with different spices, with different foods, with different drinks, and diversification and innovation absolutely is the future.
As we just heard from the CEO of Dilmah, Sri Lanka may be on the cusp of change. But for any financial rescue package to work, the economic stability of the country is the most desired. Will officials be able to secure a bailout package from IMF? And what long-term changes need to be made to ensure a crisis like this never happens? We speak to two experts. Joining me now is Dr. Roshan Pereira, economist and former director at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and Dr. P. Sarvanamuthu, Executive Director at Centre for Policy Alternatives. Let me come to you, Dr. Sarvanamuthu, first. Do you think Sri Lankan government let the situation and the issues get too bad before they started addressing it?
The particular intensity and acuteness of this crisis is definitely as a consequence of their incapacity to make any proper economic decisions and somewhat of a callous disregard for the suffering that people have been through. They shrunk the tax base. They tried to bring in organic fertilizer overnight. Anyone who has, I would have thought, any sense of economics would have realized that this was gross mismanagement.
Dr. Pereira, now that the government speaks to IMF and to their other creditors, what is the kind of bailout package that Sri Lanka is looking at with the International Monetary Fund?
So it's not so much the bailout package from the Monetary Fund alone. It has to cover all our creditors really, and all our whatever liabilities that we owe to the rest of the world. So I think the role that the IMF will play really is to come in to provide us with some kind of a backstop because now we just took some macroeconomic measures. We floated the exchange rate, we raised interest rates. But as you can see, things have not really stabilized because we really don't have a backstop. So in a sense, what IMF does is really bring us some credibility and accountability, which helps then to be able to negotiate with our creditors, which is one of the key issues really facing us because of our debt issue and the debt sustainability problem.
What are these policy measures that we are talking about, Dr. Pereira?
It really is a problem of the country spending more than it earns and consuming more than it produces. We need to put in proper fiscal revenue consolidation measures. We need to increase our taxes. We need to put in place sort of a sustainable tax system. We don't necessarily do that. We need to have reforms of our state-owned enterprises. We know that our state-owned enterprises are making huge losses and that has been just ballooning. But finally, we're very happy when we have subsidized fuel and subsidized electricity, but we don't realize that nothing comes for free. Somebody is actually paying for it. It's somewhere in the system, and in Sri Lanka, most of it lies in the balance sheets of the banks. It's a cost to the economy and cost to individuals because that basically raises all our credit costs.
Dr. Savnamuthu, is it going to be easy and is it fair, to expect a population or to put a population that is already burdened by high prices, is already burdened through the economic crisis, to go through austerity measures?
Well, it is going to get worse before it gets better. Secondly, I don't think we have any other option but to go to the IMF and to accept whatever bitter medicine that we have to take. It's a crisis of governance. And so there is a political dimension and an economic dimension. And I mean, quite frankly, who is going to lend and assist a country that cannot guarantee, cannot assure a certain degree of political stability which is required? Because what we have is a deadlock now.
So the government did rely on China for more commercial loans. Was that a wrong move on their part?
So I would say the borrowing itself is not a bad thing as long as you invest in revenue generating projects or things that will increase the productive capacity of the country. But as Dr. Savnamuthu said, most of these funds were invested in projects which now looking back in hindsight, that they are not revenue generating. So we're not earning revenue from that, but we have to pay the interest and the capital on those projects. So that is really where the problem lies. And also because it was commercial loans, what happens is it exponentially increases.
Do you see a requirement or a need for Sri Lanka to also diversify on its industries?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is this, is that, look, we should, the whole sort of manufacturing and industrialization has probably, skipped us by, and now we need to go into services. We have not properly planned the economic development of this country. We do need to focus a lot in terms of how we can, release the potential of people. We want IT. That's what we want. We want IT. And, given the sort of basic profile of Sri Lanka, we should have been the Bangalore.
Yeah, right.
We should have been the Bangalore.
The next few months are going to be crucial for the economy. The government may have to implement unpopular policies to bring down inflation and stabilize prices. That will require dealing with the simmering discontent and restoring the government's credibility. That's it for this edition of Talking Business Asia. Many thanks for watching.